The only thing we have to do here, if we want, is to specify those as strings, because all of them is strings. This one can be undefined also. So yeah, well, we can do it. API URL : string. This one :string. And if it can have more than one value, we can have this pipe, and we specify it as undefined also, because you can see if I remove this one here, it complains because it tells us that type string undefined is not assignable to type string, because we're saying that it can only be a string, but it can actually also be undefined. So TypeScript tells us that, yeah, you're doing something wrong here. So this one could also be undefined. So you should do something about it. So that's what we're doing here. Pipe undefined like this, and it will be happy. And all of the other ones will be strings here. So I'm just going to do it quite fast. String, 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 and this one here, string, and this string, and the last one, a string. Right? Save the file. That's the config. And then we have the global style. We don't need to do anything inside of here. This is a style component, so it's fine like it is now. The helpers.ts here, we're going to type this once up also. So here we have this time param. So we create parentheses. And this one is going to be a number. But the return type of the function itself is going to be a string. So we type it like this. And hours is going to be a number. And the mins is also going to be a number. So that's it for that function. Then we have the convert money. Parenthesis. It's going to be a number, and it's also going to return a string. And this one is a special one. So you can see that this formatter here, the type is actually this one here, into intel.number format, international number format. So copy this one, and we can actually specify this as a type also for it. Like so. Then the last one inside of this file is the state name. This one is going to be a string. JSON.parse has an any type as a return type. We can specify any. It shouldn't actually complain here. Yeah, and that's because this is named the wrong way here. It should be session stayed. So that's why. So JSON.parse has an any type, so that's why we have to specify it as any. You should avoid specify anything as any, because you remove all the type checking here when you specify it as any, because you're saying that it can be of any type. So always make it a habit to not use any if you can. Only use it in specific case like this one, because this one will return any. So that's why we have to specify it as any. And that's it for these files here. We can start up our application to see that it works. npm start. And it seems to be working, so that's sweet. In the next video, we're going to refactor the homepage to use TypeScript, and also the components that we use on the homepage itself. All right, let's continue to refactor the application into TypeScript and move inside of the component home.js. We're going to rename this file to TS. And also I can tell you, as if we look here in the terminal, I don't run my dev environment, because when you change the file names, it will break. So you have to restart it again. So that's why I'm going to start it up later. But if some stuff don't work because you have changed some file name or things like that, try to break it and start up your dev environment again. All right, so I renamed the home TS like this. And then inside of that file, the only thing we have to do here is to specify this as a react.functional component, react.fc. And you can see that I actually made a mistake here. This one shouldn't be TS. Then it won't work because we have JSX here. So this one should be .tsx. So change that one to home.tsx, and then it will work, hopefully. Here we have some stuff that it complains about. And that is because we haven't typed anything yet in our hook that fetches that data. So if we move inside of the hooks and use home fetch, first we rename this file to .ts. Here we're not using any JSX, so we can name it to .ts. Okay, the first thing we have to do here is to import the type movie. And we do this inside of curly brackets because this is not the default export. And then it complains here on the page. This one is going to be a number. And the search term, it actually interprets this one as a string because we set it as a default string here. So we don't have to specify anything more here. But it complains about the state, and that is because if we hover over this use state, you can see that results is set to never. It doesn't know what type this will be. That's why we can specify it as movie and an array. So we're telling it that we're setting this to an empty array, but it should interpret it as a movie array. So that's why we imported it up here, and that's why we also get the types on the state correctly here. So in the home, you can see that the warnings has disappeared because now it knows all these types because it interprets it from this hook here as we're telling it that this state is going to be of this type. And then it follows along inside of this file. So that's super great. So save the home also. Then we're going to refactor the components that we're using for the home component. So we have the button. So in the index.js file, that one is going to be renamed to index.tsx. And the style file is going to be renamed to .ts because we're not using any JSX inside of that one. And for the style file, we don't need to do anything there. But in the index.tsx file, we have to do some stuff because now we have some props here. And we're also going to remove prop types. We don't need that one when we're in TypeScript. So remove everything that has to do with the prop types. Then here I'm going to specify types. And I create a type that I call props. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't need to be called props. So we have the text prop here, text. That's going to be a string. And then we have the callback. And I'm going to type this very loosely. It's going to be a function that returns nothing. So then we specify it to void because void means that it won't return anything. So this is a click callback. All right, but it still complains we have created a prop object. So we have to specify the button as a react.functional component, react.fc. And if we want to specify our props, we can do that inside of angle brackets. And then we use our props object. And then you can see that it works. It knows the types now of these props. You can see if we hover over them, you can see the types. All right, so that's it for the button. Then we have the grid styles. We're going to rename that one to gridstyles.ts. And the index is going to be renamed to .tsx. Yet again, for the styles, we don't have to do anything here because we're not sending in any props to the style components. In the index.tsx file, we have to do some stuff though. So we remove the prop types and also make sure to remove them at the bottom here, like this. Then I specify types and I create a type props, an object, and we have the header. We set that one as a string. The children, we don't need to type that one because that's built into React. So we specify the grid to react.fc. We have angle brackets and we give it the props object. And this is it for the grid. Move on to the header. Header styles is going to be .ts like this. And index is going to be .tsx. Nothing to do in the styles file, but in the index.tsx, we can do some stuff. And we only have to specify this as a react.fc. That's everything for the header. All right. Then we have the hero image. Hero image.styles is going to be renamed to .ts. And this index.js is going to be renamed to .tsx instead. In this style component, we actually have to do something because we have this prop here and we haven't typed that one. So up here, I mark it as types. And I create a type, props equals. We have the image, and this is going to be the URL, so it's a string. And when you type a style component, you do it here. Just after the component you choose to create, we have the angle brackets again, and we send in the props like this. And there you have it. That's the styles. Then we have the index.tsx, remove the prop types. Just as before, we specify our types. Type props equals an object. Image is going to be a string. Title is going to be a string. And the text is also going to be a string. And we specify it as a react.fc. We have the angle brackets and send in the props. And this should be it for this component. Save it, move on. Movie info bar. These are for the movie page. We have the search bar. The index.js is going to be renamed to index.tsx. The search bar styles is going to be .ts. We don't have to do anything in the styles file, but in the index.tsx, we remove the prop types. Everything that has to do with prop types. Then we have the types. I create a type, props, equals an object. And then we have the set search term. And this one is going to be a callback. And how do we type this one? Well, this has implicitly an any type, but if we go back to the home and see where we have the search bar, you can see here. And here we actually get that type. So when you hover over stuff, we get that type. And that's really good because we can actually just copy this one. Copy and move back to the index.tsx file in the search bar. And then we paste it in here. So this is a react.dispatch. And inside here, we have the react.setState actions. So this is the type for the setup for the use state. And it's a string in this case. If it was a Boolean, it would have said Boolean here instead or something. First, we have a react.dispatch, and we specify the type that it is a state action. And we specify that one, that it's a string that we're going to set this state with. So the search bar is going to be a react.fc component. We have the angle brackets, and we give it the props. And that's it for the search bar. Move on to the spinner. The spinner styles is going to be renamed .ts. And the index is going to be renamed to .tsx. The spinner, we don't have any props for that one. And this one is actually nothing to do because it just exports the style component. And the last one is going to be the thumb. So we rename the index to .tsx. And the thumb styles is going to be .ts. So nothing to do with the styles, but in the index.tsx, remove the prop types. Like this, and then we specify types. Type props equals. The image is going to be a string because it's the URL to the image. Then we have the movie ID. That one is going to be a number. And the clickable is going to be a Boolean. And then we specify this as react.fc. And we give it the props. And this should be it. Save the component. And I think we should be able to start up our application. So we run npm start. Let's see if we have any errors. It actually seems to be working. All right. That's great. I didn't have any typos or stuff like that. That always makes me happy when it works the first time. Okay, so that's the home component. In the next video, we're going to convert the movie page and all the components for that page into TypeScript. So we're going to refactor the movie component and also actually the not found component. So we're going to start with the not found. This one is a small component, so we just specify this as a react.fc, and that will be it for that one. And we also have to rename it to .tsx and save the file. And now if you look in the console, you can see that it gives an error. That's because we renamed that one, and that's what I meant before. Break it, and you have to restart it, otherwise it won't work, usually. Okay, so let's move inside of the movie.js file, rename it to movie.tsx. And then we're going to refactor some stuff here. So we specify it as a react.fc. We don't have any props for this one. And you can see that it complains now because it can't interpret the types here. So we're going to fix that in the hook. So go inside the hooks and use movie fetch. We rename this one to .ts. And we also need to import some stuff here. We need the movie type object. We need the cast and the crew. That's the one that we created earlier. So we import them here also. Then I'm going to specify some types. Export type movie state. And the movie state is going to be the movie. But as I'm also creating these properties myself, the actors and the directors, I have to add these one in. So we can actually merge them together to one type. So we use the ampersand, and then we have the object. The actors is going to be an array of cast, like this. And the directors is going to be an array of crew. And that will create a type object with the movie, and then we merge in the actors and type them as an array of cast, and then we have the directors, and we type them as an array of crew. All right. The movie ID, it complains here. We have to specify the types. And we specify it as a number. And the use state here, it doesn't know what state this is actually. So we're going to specify the state. We have the angle brackets, and then we can give it the movie state. And then it will know that this state will have this type, but it complains now, and that is because we're setting it to an empty object, and it doesn't like that because we say that it can only be a movie state. So we could do it like this if we want. We tell it that it can also be an empty object, or we can do as we did before. We say as movie state, like so, and it won't complain anymore. So that's everything we have to do, I think. The movie ID, okay. Yeah, we also have to make this a string because this persisted state function is taking in a string, and this is actually a number now. So you can see how great it is with TypeScript because it's telling us when we're doing something wrong. So we convert this one to a string with a built-in function like this. And then I bet it's the same here, yeah. .toString. Like so. And this will hopefully be it. We're back inside the movie.tsx file. Yeah, and this is because we get a string back from the API, and now it wants a number, so we can convert this to a number. And there are smoother ways of doing this, so you don't have to convert it like this, but I think it's a great practice in TypeScript, so that's why I did it this way, so we can convert it, because TypeScript will complain if we send in the wrong type. But of course, we could be more consistent and refactor some stuff in the use movie fetch and also in the API file to specify the correct type from the beginning. Of course, in the API here, you can see that the movie ID is a number. We could specify this as a string instead. We can actually do that. So we make this a string. And we specify this as a number. This one should be a string. And we save it, go back to the movie. And now it should work. Yeah. So that's probably the way to do it instead. So you don't have to do all this converting. And now we have to refactor the components that we use for the movie page also. So let's begin with actors. So actor.styles is going to be actor.styles.ts, and index is going to be .tsx. We don't have any props in the styles, so we're only going to be in the index.tsx. Remove the prop types just as before. And then we have the types. Types. I create a type, props equals an object. We have the name, it's going to be a string. The character is going to be a string. The image URL is going to be a string also. And we specify this as a react.fc. and I give it the props, just as before. Save the file. Then we're going to be in the breadcrumb, so rename this one also to .ts, and the index is going to be .tsx. Same goes with the styles. We don't have to do anything, but in the index.tsx, remove the prop types. A lot of repetitive stuff here, but that's great when you learn things. As I told you before, I specify the types. Type props equals an object. We have the movie, that's the URL, so it's a string. And then this one is going to be a react.fc. And we have the angle brackets and give it the props. Yeah, I actually name it movie title. That's what it should say. Right, that's the breadcrumb. Then we have the movie info, rename the index.js to index.tsx. And the movie info styles is going to be renamed to .ts. And let's start in the styles, because this one we're sending in some props to. Up here, I mark it with types, create a type, props equals. We have the backdrop, and it's going to be a string. Just as before, we have the angle brackets here on the component that we create, and we send in the props. Don't know why it's still red. Yeah, that's because this one should be named animated movie info, like this. So yet again, you see, TypeScript is great because it will warn us if we don't do stuff the right way. It will warn us. Save it. Because I didn't see this actually when I created it before in the course. I forgot to name this one and I didn't see a warning, but now TypeScript warns me about this. Save the file and go inside the index.tsx file like this. We remove the prop types. And we're going to have some types for this one. And for this one, I'm going to import the movie state from ../../ hooks and use movie fetch. Like so. And then I'm also going to specify a type, props equal an object. And we have the movie. And the movie is going to be the movie state type. So you can see here, I import the types. I don't have to specify them again. I mean, if you really love structure, you can create specific files for your types and have them inside of those files. All right, movie info, it's going to be a react.fc. I'm going to give it the props, like so. All right, then it complains here. This one shouldn't be here. And it complains again. I did a mistake here. And you see, TypeScript, it is great. It's telling me that I did this mistake. Yeah. And that's because I'm not providing a movie ID for this one, because we shouldn't be able to click it. So go back inside of the thumb. And this one, movie ID, should be set to optional. And you can set an optional prop with a question mark like this. Save the file, go back, and you can see that the warning disappeared from the movie info. All right, save that file, and we only have one more component to go. That's the movie info bar. Rename this to .tsx and the styles to .ts. We don't have to do anything with the styles. And inside the index, we remove the prop types like this. And then we specify the types. So I have a type, props, an object, time is going to be a number. The budget is also going to be a number, and the revenue is going to be a number. And then we specify this as a React FC. We have the angle brackets and give it the props. We auto format it, and it should hopefully work. Save the file. And this, my friend, should be it, actually. We have successfully, hopefully, refactored this one into TypeScript. So let's make sure that it works. Go inside the terminal and run npm start. And it works. Super great. Here you have it. You have a TypeScript application now. And everything works as it should. No arrows anywhere. Sweet. That is the TypeScript part. And in the next part, I'm going to show you some extra stuff that the movie database can do. And that is a neat little login system. And then you can vote on the movies. We've reached the last section of this course. So first, congrats to you because you come a long way in this course. And I hope you've learned something about React. In this part of the course, I'm going to show you how to create a login for the movie database API from our application, and you will be able to vote on the different movies. So first, I just want to show you on developers.themoviedb.org what we're going to use to make the login work. So down here where it says movies, I clicked on this one. You can see the complete API for the movies. And they have one here that's a post that's called rate movies. So this is the one that I clicked on here. And by posting to this URL here, we can rate the movies. And we have to provide our API key, and we also have to provide a session ID. So that's where we do the login. And the login is, I think, somewhere, people search. Where do they have it? Authentication. They have a lot of stuff here. And first you have to create a request token. And then we create a session. So we get a session ID. So there's 2 steps you have to do to be able to log in. And they also recommend you to actually reroute to the movie database for making the login. But I also provide you with a solution here that I don't actually recommend, where you can log in from your own site without leaving that application or the site. So that's the one I'm going to use here. And the reason for this bonus chapter in the course is actually that I want to show you how to create a global context and store the user, the logged in user, in that global context. That's the main part that I want to show you. And also I got a lot of requests to show how to make a login form and be able to vote on the movies. There is one thing though that's not going to work with this solution because it's not a full solution really. In this case, you have to use your login from the movie database to be able to log in. So we won't be able to create any new users and stuff like that. And the best thing would probably be to build your own API, your own backend somehow, to have your users log in there and save data so that you can save all the stuff about the user. So there's a lot of different approaches, and this is absolutely not a fully login system and voting system. I just want to show you some small tips and tricks here to get you started if you want to create your own fully functional login system and stuff like that. Okay, so let's get to it. I'm just going to show you the code shortly here before we move on. In the api.js file, I have created these functions for us here. Down below this comment here, bonus material below for login. I have a function that's called getRequestToken. So that will obviously get the request token from the API. And then I have this one that's called authenticate. And I did some comments here also. So first we have to authenticate the request token that we get from this one. And then we have to get the session ID with the request token. So there's actually 3 steps and not 2 of them, because we have to get the request token first, and then we authenticate that request token, and then we get the session ID, and then we are logged in. And then I have this function down below here that's called rate movie, and this one will send our rating score to the movie database API and hopefully return an object that says that we were successful. So that's what we're going to be using in this part of the tutorial. So let's get started. In the next video, we're going to create a global context and a global state that we can use to store the user in. All right, let's start by creating a context for our application. And we are touching on kind of advanced stuff now in React. So don't feel bad if you don't understand all of this stuff the first time. All right, inside the src folder, we're going to create a new file that we call context.js, all lowercase letters. So it should be in the root of the src, not in the components or anything like that. In the root of the src, I can close this once here. So we have the context.js file, and inside of that one, we're going to import React, comma, and the use state. And we import it from React. Then I'm going to create something that's called a context in React. And when we create a context, we are creating something that will make it possible for us to provide our application with something in this context that we want to use down in the component tree in the application. In this case, it's going to be a state value and a setter that we're going to use. So the context can be any value that you want to provide down to your application, but it's really, really handy if we want to have a state and a setter that we want to be able to access from anywhere in the application. So I'm going to export this one because we have to import the context in the component where we want to use it. So export const, I call it context with capital C. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't need to be named context. And from react dot, we have something that's called create context, and I call this one. You could also, of course, import it up here like this. We can do that instead if you feel that that is better. I don't know really. All right. Then I'm going to create something that's called a provider. The provider is going to wrap our application and make sure that we provide this value to our application. So we can decide where we want to wrap this provider in our application. In our case, we're going to wrap it in the app component later so that we give the value to our complete application. So we wrap it high up in the hierarchy so that the complete application and all the components will have access to this value. So I create a const. I call this component user provider. I destructure out the children's because we're going to use this component to wrap our application. So that means that the children is going to be the app in this case. I have a fat arrow. And then I'm going to create a state, const, state, set state, just as we did before. I call the use state hook, and I can give it a value of undefined as initial value. Right, that's our state. So we're creating this one in the user provider. Then we want to provide this one to our application. So I'm going to return from the context we created up here. Context, that's a component. We have something that's called a provider. So context.provider, capital C, capital P. And then we have a prop that's called value. And inside the value prop, we can provide this value that we want our application to have access to. So I have curly brackets, and I want to provide an array with a state and a set state. That will make sure that we get the exact same structure as we do here with the state. We have the state itself, and then we have the setter in an array. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm giving it the exact same structured array. All right. So inside this one, we're going to return the children. And this makes sure that we can use this provider to wrap any component in our React application, and it will provide it with these values. Then we have to export default user provider like this. Save this file. We're finished here. This is how you set up a global context and a state that you want your application to be able to access globally. Now we're going to move inside of the app.js file, and inside this file up here somewhere, we can mark it with context, and we import user provider. That's the one we created from ./context. All right, so that's our provider component. And we want to place it high up in the hierarchy. So we can just place it here inside of the router, user provider, like this. And I'm going to take this one here and move it down. And I do some auto formatting. So we're wrapping our complete application inside of the user provider. And this makes sure that our complete application will have access to this state that we created. So we're going to use this one later. But first, we're going to create our login page. So that's what we're going to start doing in the next video. We're going to start creating our login component. And I didn't say that. I'm using the version of the application without TypeScript. So you shouldn't use the one with TypeScript. Use the original one that we finished before we did anything with TypeScript, and also before we refactor it to classes, because I'm using the functional component version. Just to be super clear so that you know what project you're using for this one. All right, let's move on. Inside of the components folder, we're going to create a new component that's called login.js. Capital L. And we import React, and we're also going to need use state and use context. That's a new hook that we're going to use to grab our context. I'm going to show you that in a second. And we import these ones from React. Then we're going to import something that's called use navigate from react-router-dom. And this one is used if you want to navigate programmatically in your application. Then we're going to need the functions that I showed you in the API file. So import API from ../API. And for this one, we're going to reuse the button component. So I mark it with components, import button from ../button. All right. And then we're also going to create some styles for this one. So we can actually do that now and scaffold them out first. So we create a new file in the components folder that's called login.styles.js. We're going to create the actual styles in the next video. But for now, we import styled from style components. And we export const wrapper, and it equals a styled.div and double backticks. Save the file, go back to the login.js. We mark it with styles and import wrapper from ../login styles, login.styles. Like this. And then we need our context. So I mark it with context and we import context from ../context. And that's of course the one that we created before. All right. Then we can create our component const login equals. We don't have any props for this one. We make an explicit return and we have a return statement and we can create the JSX first. I'm just going to export default it first also, so I don't forget that one. Export default login. In the return statement, we're first going to return our wrapper. And inside the wrapper, I'm going to create a label. I'm going to type in username colon. And then below that one, I create an input field, input. The type is going to be text. The value, we're going to grab the value later from the state. So I just mark it with state value for now. And the name is going to be username. The onChange is going to be handle input. And that's a function that we're going to create. So we can scaffold this one out here first. Const handle input equals an arrow function. We're going to take in the event. So I can skip the parentheses as it's only one parameter. And we just create an empty function for now, like this. Then we're also going to have a function that's called handle submit. And we leave it empty for now also. All right, so let's continue here with the input. So we can close this one here. And then we create another input field. The type for this one is going to be password. We don't want to show the characters that the user type in this one because it's the password input box. The value is also going to be a state value that we're going to add. The name for this one is password. And the onChange is also going to be handle input. So we have the same function to both of these input fields. And we close it here. Then we're going to have a submit button and we use our component, the button component. The text is going to be login. And also we don't have to provide this with a prop that's called text and we send in the text. We could also wrap the text with this component if we want to do that instead. And then we grab the text with a children prop. We have a callback and that's going to be the handle submit for this one. Do some auto formatting, save it. So that's the basic structure of our component. We want to be able to use this component. So we have to create a new route for it. And we can do that in the app.js file. So first up here where we have the components, we're going to import login from ./components/login. There we have the component. And then we can create it somewhere here. We create a new route with a path. This one is going to be shown when we go to the path login. So /login, and the element is going to be our component login. And then we close the route component. Do some order formatting, save it, go back to our application, make sure that it's running. I'm actually not running mine. So I'm going to type in npm start. Whoa, I had it really zoomed in here. And I'm going to bring up the console for later. So if we go up here in the route and type in /login, you can see that we show our component here. So that is working. Great. Go back to the application and the login component. We're going to create a few states for this one. So at the top of the login component, we create a state that we call user name and set username equals use state. I'm going to create an empty string as initial state for this one. We create another state that's called password, and the setter is called set password equals a use state with an empty string as initial value also for this one. Something like that. And then I also want another state that's called error and set error. And we have a use state call, and we set it to false initially. So these are the three states that we have. You could also have one combined states for the input fields if you want to have that. I choose to create them separately like this. Then we're going to grab our context. We're importing it up here, and we can grab the context with a hook that's called use context. And our context is going to be the state that we created. So we create a new const, and we can destructure it out just as before. We have the state. This state is actually going to be the user, so we can be more specific. We call it the user and the set user. And it equals, we call the use context hook. And this works as simple as we just give it the context. And this one is going to bring in the context for us. And the user, we're not going to use this one. We're only going to use the set user. So we can mark it with an underscore if we want to do that. This is also very subjective on how you like to do stuff like this. Then we have a hook that we also imported for our navigation. So we create a const that we call navigate. And we call that hook use navigate. And this will make it possible for us to use this navigate const to navigate programmatically in our application. All right, so first we're going to make these input fields controlled by this component. So we have to hook them up with state, just as we did with the search bar. And we have this handle input here, where we get the event from the input fields. So the input fields, the value for this one, we can change this one now. It's going to be the state that's called username. No, not a capital N, all lowercase letters. And this one is going to have the value from the password state. All right. So this will make sure that it is connected to the state. So now when these input fields change, we can make that change in the handle input because we have an onChange handler on them, and we can set the different states in the handle input. And you can see here that I give them a name. So first we want to grab the name. So I create a const name equals e.currentTarget.name. And this one is going to grab the name that I set here on the name prop. And then we have another const with the value. And we get that one from e.currentTarget.value. So we need the name and the value. And actually, you could do this in a one-liner. If we use just one state for our input fields, we could set the name of the properties in an object dynamically with the name that we get from the input field, and then we set the value. So that will create new values in the object depending on how many input fields we add to our application. But in this case, I have a separate state for each input field, so I do it like this instead. In a small application like this, I think this is more readable, actually. But this means that we have to check now what input box that we type in. So we have an if statement, if name equals username. Then we're going to set the username state with the set username state setter, and we have the value. So we check the name of the input box, and then we get the value. If the name is username, we know that we should set the state for the username. So that's what we're doing here. And if the name equals password, we're going to set the password state. And we give this one the value also. This one maybe should have a lowercase n instead, not an uppercase. So we change this one just to be consistent. Auto format it, save it, and we can see if it works. Go back to the application and we can type something in here. And yeah, it works. So we know that we have our control components. So that's great. So our input fields are working. Then we have to submit something and actually grab something from the API to make the login. And we do that in the handle submit function. The first thing we're going to do is to set the error to false, just when we fetched our movies. And then I have a try block and then a catch block. And we have the error. And for this catch, we can set the error to true. That's the only thing we're going to do inside of the catch block. So we're going to be in the try block now. And first we need to get the request token. So I create a new const. I actually noticed now also that I forgot to bump up the font size. So I'm going to do that now. And from now on, it's going to be bigger. Okay, so I have a const with the request token. We're going to wait from the API. I have this function, get request token. And of course, this one has to be an async function because we are awaiting here. So mark this one with async. So that will hopefully get us the request token. If something goes wrong here, the catch block will set the error to true, and we're going to handle that just in a second down in the JSX. The const, we're going to grab the session ID. We await again from the API. I have a function that's called authenticate. And for this one, we're going to give it the request token first. And then we give it the username and then the password. All right, so that will hopefully get us our session ID. And then we can set the user. And this one, the set user, is actually the context that we created because we are grabbing the context here and the setter for the user. So we're setting this one in the context. I'm going to set it with an object. First, I want to set the session ID. So I give it from the session ID. That's the one that we get back from the API. We have a property that's called session_ID, all lowercase letters. And then I'm going to set the username. And as this is also ES6 syntax, I don't have to type out this twice because it will interpret this automatically. All right, and then we just have one more thing to do, and that is we have to navigate somewhere when we successfully logged in. So we can navigate programmatically with React Router. We use the navigate that we got here from that hook, use navigate, replace that one. We place what we get back here in the navigate const. So navigate, parentheses, and we just specify the URL. And in this case, we want to go to the home page. So we specify it like this. And I want to do some console logging here. Console log the session ID just to see that we get something here. Save the file, go back to our application. And now we haven't styled this one. We're going to do that in the next video, but we can use the input fields here anyways. So my login is Weben. Then I have my password that I'm not going to tell you, something like this. And I try to log in. And you can see that we get this object back from the API. We get the session ID and the success is telling us true. So that's really, really neat. We know that our login system is working and it redirected us to the home page. So go back to the login page. I want to do one more thing here before we finished with the logic for this component. Down below here, just above the first label, I have a curly bracket and I'm going to create a short circuit. I'm going to check if the error is true. Double ampersand, if the error is true, I'm going to have a div with a class name of error. And then I'm just going to say, there was an error. Something like this. And then I auto format it. And then I'm going to save this file. So you can, of course, type in whatever you want to. Save the file, go back to the application. So just try to type something in here. and click login. And you can see that we show this one here instead. There was an error, and we also get an error in our console. So we know that the try and catch block is working. So this is our login component and the logic. And in the next video, we're going to create the styles for this component. We have our login component and the functionality for that one. And now we're going to create the styles for it. So go back inside of the code editor and the login.styles.js file. We have our wrapper. That's the only style component that we're using for this one. First, we're going to display it as a flex. We align dash items to sender. And we justify the content to sender also, just to sender stuff. Then we set the flex direction on this one. It's going to be column. And we can save it to see what we've got so far. You can see that we're centering it here in the middle of the screen. So that's great. Go back to the code. I'm going to set a max width to 320 pixels. The padding is going to be 20 pixels. And the color is going to be from the variables. We have a color that's named dark gray. So double dash dark gray. Save it, go back just to see what we've got. All right. When I set the max width to 320 pixels, it's showing it to the left. But if we set the margin to 0 and auto and save it, that will place it in the center again. So that's great. All right. So that's everything for the wrapper. Then we have the input. We nest this one inside of the wrapper component. We set the width to 100% on the input fields. The height is going to be 30 pixels. The border is going to be 1 pixel solid. And we have a variable for the color. And we also use dark gray for that one. Then we set the border dash radius to 20 pixels. The margin is going to be 10 pixels and 0. And the padding is going to be 10 pixels. So save the file, go back to the application, and you can see that we created these nice little input fields here. Sweet. With rounded corners, and it matched the overall look of the application. Then we just want to style our arrow class also, dot arrow. And for that one, I'm just going to set the color to red. You can style this a little bit better if you want to do that. So if we type something in here and click login, you can see that this is the arrow. All right, and that's actually it for this login component. I'm not going to do any heavy styling as this is the bonus section of this course. So if you want to do it nicer, you can do that yourself. In the next video, we're going to be in the header and show the logged in user and also have a login button. Okay, let's create the login system from the header. We're going to show a button to log in, and I'm just going to place it in the middle actually here. It maybe should be to the right, but yeah, as I told you, I'm not doing any heavy styling for this section, so you can style it to your own likings later. So let's go back inside of the application and inside the header component, so the header folder and the index.js file. The one thing we need to add to the imports here is to actually import the context. So we import context from .. and .. again. We have the context file like this. And this one is making an implicit return now. We need to have some functionality inside of it. So we have to change this one into an explicit return like this. And we add the return statement here. Auto format it just to make it a little bit nicer. Some people also have the formatting to activate when you save the file. I actually don't like that because sometimes when I save it and I'm not finished, it starts to format stuff and I don't like that. So that's why I do it manually instead. All right, const user. We're going to grab the user from the context. We don't need to set anything here. We just need the user. And we call the use context hook. We actually need to import that one also up here. So import react, comma, curly brackets, use context. So we give this use context hook the context. And this will bring us the user. we don't need to destructure out the setter for this state. We just need the user. So that's why we're not destructuring out that one. And we can do a console log user like this. Save the file, go back to our application. I'm going to try to log in again. I click login. And you can see that we get this console log here. So we have the session ID and the username of Weben. And that's, of course, for Weben Falk. All right, so we know that our context is working great. And that's sweet. So go back to the index.js file in the header folder. And now we can use this one here. So just between the two logos here, I'm going to create curly brackets. And the first thing I'm going to do is to check if we have a user. And then I create a Turner operator. So I have a question mark, parenthesis. And the first thing I'm going to do, if we have a user, I'm going to show a span with a class name of logged in, like this. And I'm going to type out logged in as colon. And then I have new curly brackets and I grab the user.username. And that's from the object that we get back from the context, of course. So when we are logged in, we're going to show the text logged in as, and we're also showing the username. Otherwise, if we're not logged in, we have a colon here, and we have a new pair of parentheses. I'm going to use the link component, and it's going to link to, if you remember this one, the link component is the one that we use from React Router to navigate inside of our application. This one is going to link to the login page, like this. And inside the link, I'm going to have a span that has a class name of login. And it says login. And then do some nice auto formatting. And I'm going to move this one up and save the file and see if it works. Go back to the application. We can't hardly see it here. We're going to style this in a second. But we have a login button. So it takes us to the login page. So yet again, I'm going to log in. And this is something that you also can do. If you want, you can store the user information in the session storage or in the local storage. There's a lot of discussion going on what is the best practices to use. In this case, we have a session ID, so we have to request a new session ID on each session from the movie database API. So I'm just storing it in the application itself. So that means that it will get wiped out every time you reload the application and you have to log in again. If this was in the real world, we probably would have a login system that will also save this token somewhere so you don't have to log in every time. And I actually have a YouTube video where I show how to create a backend and set up JSON web tokens and how to create a login system in a React application. So this is a very simple use case on how you can create a login system here. All right, that was a side note. I'm going to click the login button. And hopefully up here, yeah, you can see that we're showing logged in as Weben. So it's working. We have to give it some styling also. And this is just going to be a couple of rows. So I'll do it in this video. So inside the header.styles.js, inside here, we actually don't need the class names that are set. We can just set the color to a variable of white, like this. And then we have the A tag. I set the color to the same var double dash white. And the text dash decoration is going to be set to none. Auto format it, save it, and also if we want, we can remove these classes. We don't need them. We can just have a span on these ones. Something like this. Save the file, go back to the application. You can see that now we see it. And yeah, this is probably not the most beautiful way. It doesn't look that good because I'm just placing it in the middle now. We would have some dedicated space for our login button and stuff like that. But this is just to show the functionality, so I'm not going to style it any better than this. So I click the login, and I log in again. Click the login button. Whoops, something. I guess I typed the password wrong here. I log in again, and that works. And now you can see that we have this white text instead, and it tells us that I'm logged in. So that's great. In the next video, we're going to create the rate component that we're going to show somewhere here, I think. We're almost finished with the voting system, but we need a rating component that we can place here in the movie info component. So we're going to create that one now. Move back inside of the code editor, and inside the components, create a new folder that we call rate, capital R. And inside of that folder, we create a new file that's called index.js. And I'm actually not going to have any styling for this one. I'm going to use the components as they are. So first I'm going to import React, and I'm also going to need the use state for this one because it is going to be a control component. I import it from React. Then I create my component rate equals, and I'm going to destructure out the callback for this one because when we vote, we need to have a callback function that will do something. And in this case, it's going to send a request to the API. So that's our component. I'm also going to export default rate like this. And the first thing we do in this component is to create a state with a value and a set value equals use state. And we're going to start with the value 5. The rating is going to be between 1 and 10. And then we have the return statement, and we return our JSX. So I'm going to make it simple here. I create a wrapping div, and then I create an input. And the type is going to be range. So we create a range slider. The min value is going to be 1. The max is going to be 10. And the value is going to be our state value. And then on change, we have to change this state value. So I want to show you also that you can create an inline function instead of creating a function up here. So we have the event E, and I create an inline arrow function. And then we set the value e.currentTarget.value, and this is enough. And we close this component. All right, so that's our range slider. After the range slider, we want to show of our value like this. And then I create a p tag just to get it on a new row. And I create a button. I have an on-click handler on this button. And in this case, we have an inline arrow function because we are going to call our callback with a value. And we give it the value. If we don't have this inline arrow function here and we just type it out like this, then it's going to instantly run this and it won't work. So we have to have an inline function here as we're providing an argument to this callback function. All right, close it, and inside of the button, we type out rate. Do some auto formatting, save it. We're going to move inside a movie info component in the index.js file. And up here where we import the thumb, we're also going to import our rate component /rate. And then we're going to show the rate component somewhere below. I think we're going to place it, maybe here, just above the end tag for the text. So I create a new div, and inside that div, I have a p tag, rate movie. And below that one, we use our rate component. And for now, we don't have the function that we're going to send into this one, the callback function. So we're just showing the component just to see that it works and shows up. Save the file, go back to the application, and you can see that we have the rate slider here, and we have our rate button. It doesn't work now, as you can see, because we're not sending in the callback function to it. But this one will work in the next video because we're going to tie all this together and make it work so that when we press this rate button, we will send along this rating number to the API and we will rate this movie. All right, we're almost finished, and this is actually the last video in this course, so hope you enjoy the course. We're going to tie this together, so let's move inside of the code and inside the movie info component in the index.js file. The first thing we have to do is to grab the context. So context, I import context from ... and ... again, and context. So we're going to use the context, and that means that we also need to import from up here the use context hook. Right? And now you hopefully can see how handy it is to have this global state because we can access it from any component in the application. And in this case, we're going to grab the user and the session ID so we can send along the session ID to the API when the user rate the movie. And now we're making this implicit return. We're going to change this one to an explicit return. So return, and I create a curly bracket, and then we need to have one below also. There, do some auto formatting and go back up. Give it some space. And first we're going to grab the user from our context, just as we did before. So const user, use context, and we're giving it the context. So this will give us the user here. And then we are going to send in a callback function to our rate component here. So we're creating this function here in this component and send it along to the rate component. We're going to call this function const handle rating. This is going to be an async function because we're making an API call. We have the value. And then we can do some stuff inside of here. So this value is going to be the value from the range slider. So I create a new const rate equals. Then I wait, and from the API dot, didn't I import it up here? No, I also need to import the API. We do that up here, import API from dot dot forward slash API, like this. Then I go back down here and change this one API dot. I'm going to grab the function that's called rate movie. And if you want to know more about these functions, you can always check them out in the api.js file. Because I told you probably too many times now that I pre-made these functions for you so you don't have to do that in this course. All right, move back to the movie info and the index.js file. So the rate movie function is going to take in 3 arguments. So we have the user.sessionID, and we have the movie.id because we need to know the movie ID of the movie that we want to rate. And we also want to give it the value. So that's the rating value. All right, and that's actually everything we need to do. In this case, I just want to console log out the rate to see that we get something back and that the rating was working. So we can use this handle rating now down below here. We can give it to the rate component. We have a prop that's called callback. And we give it the handle rating. And save the file. And hopefully this should be it. Go back to the application. Yeah, we have one more thing to do because I don't want to show this rate slider when we're not logged in. So we can do that also. So just here when we have the rating, outside of the wrapping div, I'm going to create a Turner operator. I'm going to check if user, then I have double ampersand, and I move my end curly bracket down here, auto format it, and it will also auto generate this parenthesis. So if the user exists, if we're logged in, we're going to show the rating. Otherwise, we don't show anything. Save the file, go back to our application. You can see that we're not showing the rate slider now. We have to log in. So we click the login button and I log in. And now we're logged in. We're going to go to a movie here. And now you can see that we see the rating slider. So I don't actually know if this movie is any good, but I'm going to give it a rating of 8. And I click the rate button. And here you can see in the console that we got a success of true and status code 1 and status message success. And if we click rate again, you can see that we get another message because it says that the item record was updated successfully. So you can update your rating score if you want to do that. There's also a resource in the endpoint if you want to remove the score also. So there are some neat stuff that you can do with the movie database API. And I hope this inspired you to actually build more stuff into this application because now you have a good foundation. And for example, the next step you can do is to create a logout button for the user. And the way I would do it in this case is that I can just wipe out the global context, the state here, and remove the user from the global state. And that will log out the user. We don't have to do anything else with the movie database API or something like that. All right, that's it for this course. I hope you enjoy this. I sure enjoy this. This is the 3rd iteration of the course. So this is the 3rd time that I actually update it and re-record it from scratch. And if you want free tutorials, you can always visit my YouTube channel, search for Webenfalk, or you can go to webenfalk.com if you want more courses from me.